The moment I realized my best friend was stealing from me. My friendship with Jake began the way most friendships do, on the playground. We were the same age, lived in the same neighborhood, and somehow we just clicked. From the moment we met in 3rd grade, we were inseparable. We spent our childhood riding bikes up and down the street, playing basketball at the local courts, and creating endless mischief around the block. It was a simple time, and I never once questioned the bond we shared. Jake was more than just my friend. He was like a brother. We understood each other in a way no one else did, and we never had to try too hard to make it work. As we got older, things naturally changed. High school came around and our interests started to shift. I became obsessed with music, especially guitars, while Jake found his passion in sports. I wasn't much into football, but he loved it and I didn't mind watching him play. We went to different colleges. He went to school with a great sports program while I moved to a city to study music. Still, we kept in touch, texting late at night, catching up when we could. I never expected that distance to change the dynamic of our friendship, and for years, it didn't. But then something subtle began to shift. It wasn't something obvious at first, just small changes that I brushed off as part of growing up. Jake started visiting me less when I was home for breaks, and when he did, it felt different. He'd show up at my apartment unannounced, hanging around without much of a purpose, just casually looking through my music collection or sitting silently in the corner. I thought nothing of it at the time, convinced he was just bored. After all, I had always been there for him, right? The first time I really noticed something was off was when Jake came by my apartment one evening asking if I could help him out with something. He explained that he was looking for a specific guitar, a rare one that he had always wanted. At first, I didn't think much of it. He knew I worked at a small music shop and I had access to all sorts of instruments. It was a big favor, but I didn't mind. I found the guitar he was talking about, a vintage, one-of-a-kind piece. It was expensive, but he promised he would pay me back in a couple of weeks. I trusted him. After all, he was my best friend. A few weeks passed and Jake didn't mention the guitar again. I casually brought it up, asking when he was going to pay me back. He told me he was waiting on a paycheck and that it would come soon. I didn't push it. I figured it was just a small delay, something that would resolve itself. But weeks turned into months and the money never came. Every time I brought it up, Jake had an excuse. "I'll pay you back next week, man. You know how it is, things are tight right now." I started to feel uneasy. It wasn't like Jake to be like this. He had always been reliable, always came through when he said he would. But now he was dodging me. The visits to my place became more frequent, and each time he would bring up some new item he needed help with, whether it was a new guitar pedal, an amp, or another piece of equipment. I started to realize that every time he asked for help, he wasn't offering to pay me back. He was just expecting me to hand over what he wanted. It started small, just a couple of $100 here and there, but then it escalated. One day, Jake asked me if I could get him a brand new custom guitar, the kind that cost thousands of dollars. I was shocked. This wasn't just a small favor anymore, it was a huge ask, but somehow I found myself agreeing. I didn't want to let him down, I wanted to be the friend he could always count on. "Don't worry about it," he said. "I'll pay you back as soon as I can." That's when the red flags started to grow brighter. Jake wasn't just asking for favors anymore, he was treating me like a source of free stuff. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had become an easy target. Jake had always been charming, the kind of guy who could talk his way out of anything. He'd flash that smile, make me feel like I was the one in the wrong for even asking for the money back. "Come on, man," he'd say. "You know how much I appreciate this. You're my best friend. I'll make it up to you, but when?" Time kept passing, and every time I brought it up, Jake would promise he'd get me the money. "I've got a big deal coming in, just give me a little more time," he would say. But there was always an excuse, always a reason why now wasn't the right time. A few months later, I was sitting at home one night and it hit me like a ton of bricks. Jake had taken so much from me, and I had no idea when, or if, I'd ever see that money again. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was the principle of it. My best friend had been using me, taking advantage of my kindness, and I hadn't even realized it until now. I decided I needed to confront him. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. He came over to my apartment again, looking as casual as ever, but something about him felt off. I sat him down and asked him straight up, "Jake, what's going on? You owe me a lot of money and I've been patient, but this can't go on. Are you ever going to pay me back?" He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, looking at the floor for a moment before meeting my eyes. "Listen, man," he said slowly, "I'm not paying you back. I can't. I've got other priorities right now. And honestly, you shouldn't have expected me to pay you back in the first place. You're my friend, you should have known I'd take care of it when I could." I stared at him, stunned. The words didn't make sense. This wasn't the Jake I knew. "What do you mean you're not going to pay me back?" I asked, my voice rising. "You've taken thousands of dollars from me. You don't just get to walk away from that." He leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. I've always known you. Help me out, man. I never asked for any of this to be a transaction, but you can't seriously be mad at me for being a little opportunistic. It's not my fault you let it get this far." I was speechless. He was actually justifying his actions, flipping it on me as if I were the one who had done something wrong. The betrayal was sharp, cutting deeper than anything I could have expected from someone I had considered a brother. The friend I had trusted, who I had shared everything with, was now standing in front of me, casually dismissing the years of friendship we'd built. "Is that how it's going to be?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper now. Jake didn't even flinch. "Yeah, that's how it is." In that moment, I realized that everything had changed. The person I thought I knew, the friend I had trusted, was no longer there. What had once been a strong and meaningful connection was now just an illusion. I was left with the cold, hard truth. Sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. The days following that conversation with Jake were some of the most uncomfortable and confusing of my life. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that lingered like a dark cloud. It wasn't just the money, it was everything. The years of friendship, the countless moments of trust, the things we had shared, all seemed to be crumbling away in front of me. The man I had known for most of my life, the one who had been by my side through thick and thin, had turned out to be someone completely different. It felt like I had been living in a lie. After Jake left that night, I spent hours just sitting in my apartment, replaying the conversation over and over in my head. His words echoed in my mind. "You shouldn't have expected me to pay you back." The more I thought about it, the more it made sense, at least in his mind. Jake had never been the type to see things from anyone else's perspective. To him, everything was transactional, and I had just been another means to an end. I was the guy who always gave him what he wanted, and he never once thought about the consequences of taking advantage of me. I tried to focus on work, but it was impossible. Every customer who came into the music shop seemed to remind me of the debt Jake owed me. Every guitar I sold, every amp I tuned, was just a reminder of the things I had sacrificed for him. It wasn't even the material value of what he owed, it was the principle. The fact that he had used me, taken advantage of my generosity, and had the audacity to act like I was the one in the wrong, it made me sick to my stomach. A few days after the confrontation, I ran into one of Jake's other friends, Mike, at a local bar. I hadn't seen Mike in a while, and we ended up sitting together, talking about old times. It was supposed to be a casual conversation, but the weight of everything I had been going through hung in the air. After a few beers, I couldn't help myself. "Hey Mike," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Have you talked to Jake recently?" Mike looked at me with a confused expression. "Yeah, he's been good. Why, you guys okay?" I hesitated. I didn't want to air my dirty laundry in public, but I needed answers. "I don't know, man. I've been having some problems with him. He's been avoiding me, hasn't been paying me back like he said he would. And honestly, I don't know what to think anymore." Mike didn't seem surprised. He took a sip of his beer and let out a sigh. "Look man, Jake been acting weird lately. He's been going through something, but he's not really open about it. He doesn't like talking about his stuff, but honestly the guy been a little off." I raised an eyebrow. "Off hell?" Mike shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "I don't know. It's just that, well, Jake been talking about the money situation, and from what I gathered, he doesn't really feel like he owes you anything. He says you offered him all that stuff and he never asked for it. I'm just telling you what I heard. It's like he doesn't even think he's in the wrong." I felt a tight knot in my stomach. Hearing Mike confirm what I already suspected didn't make me feel better. It just added another layer to the betrayal. Jake wasn't just avoiding responsibility. He was rewriting the narrative in his mind. He had convinced himself that I was the one who had done something wrong, that I was the one who had put him in this situation. It made me feel like I was losing my grip on reality. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. The years of friendship we had built now felt hollow. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let him manipulate me for so long without seeing it? And yet, even in the midst of all this, I still found myself thinking about our history, about the way things used to be. How could I reconcile the Jake I had known with the one who was now standing before me, cold and calculating? I needed to talk to him again. I had to get answers, real answers, not the vague excuses or manipulative lies he had been feeding me. I had to face him one last time, and I knew it wouldn't be easy. But this time, I wasn't going to let him control the narrative. I wasn't going to let him twist everything in his favor. The next week I reached out to Jake. I texted him, asking if he could meet me at the usual place, our old spot at the park where we used to hang out as kids. He replied almost immediately, saying he would be there in an hour. Part of me hoped that this time, things would be different. Maybe he would apologize, maybe he would finally realize the damage he had done. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. Jake wasn't that person anymore. When I got to the park, I spotted him almost immediately. He was sitting on one of the benches, his usual confident demeanor intact, as if nothing had changed. I walked over, trying to calm my nerves. I couldn't let him see how much this was affecting me. I had to stay strong. "Jake," I said as I sat down next to him, "we need to talk. No more excuses, no more games. I need you to explain yourself." Jake looked at me with an expression that was almost amused. "Explain myself? Man, I don't owe you anything. You've been acting like this whole thing's my fault. I never asked for any of this. You kept giving me stuff and now you want to make me the bad guy." The anger inside me flared up again, but I bit my tongue. I couldn't let him control the situation anymore. "You know damn well you owe me. I've been patient with you for months and you've been dodging me this whole time. You think it's easy for me to let this go. I've done everything for you, Jake. And this is how you repay me." Jake leaned back on the bench, his eyes narrowing. "I don't need to explain myself to you. I don't owe you anything. You gave me things because you wanted to, not because I asked. Don't make this into something it's not." It was the final straw. In that moment, I realized that Jake wasn't just avoiding responsibility. He was gaslighting me. He had twisted the entire situation in his mind so thoroughly that he truly believed he hadn't done anything wrong. And that was the point when I knew our friendship was over. "I think we're done here," I said, standing up. "You can keep telling yourself that you're not the bad guy, but you and I both know the truth. You've used me for far too long and I'm done being your fool." As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't the kind of closure I had hoped for, but it was the closure I needed. Jake wasn't the person I thought he was, and maybe, in the end, it was better to let him go than to keep clinging to a friendship that had already died. The days after I confronted Jake were a blur. I thought that once I had finally said everything I needed to say, I would feel a sense of relief, but instead, I felt an overwhelming emptiness. It was like a piece of me had been ripped away, and no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the wound was still raw. The fact that I had finally cut ties with Jake, someone I had considered a brother for so long, didn't feel like the victory I thought it would. It just felt wrong. The weeks that followed were tough. I threw myself into work, trying to drown out the memories of our friendship with busy hours at the music store. Every guitar I tuned, every new customer who came in to buy records, only seemed to remind me of the friendship I had lost. It was as though every corner of my life was a reminder of Jake. I tried to avoid thinking about him, but that was easier said than done. We had shared so many moments, from the small things like laughing at dumb jokes to the big moments, celebrating each other's successes and supporting each other through the rough patches. Now, all of that felt like a distant memory. I started spending more time at home just trying to process everything. I scrolled through my phone, looking at old pictures of the two of us, and I found myself questioning everything. Had I missed the signs? Were there moments I should have noticed, times when things were already slipping? I began to doubt my judgment, wondering how I had allowed myself to be so blind for so long. It wasn't just the money, though that was certainly a big part of it. It was the way he had manipulated me, the way he had turned our entire friendship into something I didn't recognize. As the days turned into weeks, I stopped hearing from Jake. At first, I thought it was just temporary, that maybe he was giving me space, but after a while it became clear that he had moved on. He didn't try to reach out, didn't apologize, didn't even acknowledge the fact that everything had fallen apart. It was as if I had never mattered to him, and that realization stung more than I could have imagined. I had spent so much time trying to fix things, trying to salvage our relationship, and he hadn't even cared enough to do the same. I wasn't the only one who noticed the change. A few of our mutual friends, the ones who had been in our circle for years, started to ask me what had happened. I didn't want to talk about it at first, but eventually I opened up to a few of them. Mike, the guy I had spoken to at the bar, seemed to understand the most. He had known Jake for just as long as I had, and he could tell something had been off for a while. But even Mike admitted that he had noticed Jake's behavior changing too. "He's been different," Mike said, shaking his head. "I don't know what's going on with him, but I don't think he's handling things well." Still, that didn't make me feel any better. It didn't change the fact that Jake had betrayed me, and no amount of sympathy from other people could fill the void he had left behind. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had allowed myself to be dragged into his world. Jake had never been a stable person, but I had always believed that our bond could overcome any challenge. I had given him the benefit of the doubt time and time again, believing that he was just going through a rough patch, that eventually things would get back to normal. But normal wasn't coming back. Our friendship was gone, and no amount of wishing could change that. A few weeks later, I was having a quiet night at home when I got a text from Jake. It was the first message I had received from him since our last confrontation. My heart sank as I saw his name pop up on the screen. At first, I didn't know whether I should even read it. I had been avoiding the idea of hearing from him again, convinced that whatever he had to say would only bring more pain. But something inside me, some twisted curiosity, made me open it. The message was short and it caught me off guard. "I'm sorry, I screwed up. I've been an asshole. I can't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I regret everything. I took advantage of you and I can't take that back. I just wish things had turned out differently." I stared at the message for a long time, trying to process what he had written. On one hand, it was the apology I had been waiting for, the one I thought I deserved. But on the other hand, it felt empty. It felt like too little, too late. I didn't know if I could forgive him. I didn't know if I wanted to. He had crossed a line, and this apology, though it came from the right place, didn't feel like it could undo the damage. I thought about it for a long time before I responded. I didn't want to let my emotions get the best of me, but at the same time, I couldn't let him off the hook so easily. "Jake," I texted back, "I appreciate the apology, but I don't know where we go from here. You've hurt me in ways that I don't think can be fixed. I don't know if I can trust you again." I sat there for a while, staring at the screen, waiting for a response. But it didn't come. Jake didn't reply. I sat in the silence, feeling the weight of the years of friendship that had dissolved into nothing. Maybe deep down, I had hoped that an apology from him would bring some kind of closure, some sense of peace. But as I stared at the empty screen, I realized that closure didn't come from words. It came from within, from the ability to let go and move on. I deleted the message and put my phone down. It was over. It had to be. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I kept going through the motions of life, working at the music shop, seeing friends, trying to distract myself from the memories that kept popping up when I least expected it. But the weight of everything still lingered, always there, just beneath the surface. It wasn't easy. It wasn't even close to being easy. But I knew one thing: I had to keep moving forward. I had to find a way to heal, to rebuild the trust that had been shattered, and to never let anyone take advantage of me like that again. Jake might have been my best friend for years, but now he was a ghost from my past. And while I couldn't erase the history we shared, I knew I could create a future without him. And that had to be enough. As time passed, I found myself navigating a strange emotional landscape, one that was both familiar and entirely foreign. The days grew longer, the seasons changed, and slowly but surely, the sting of Jake's betrayal began to dull. It wasn't an immediate relief, and there were days when I still felt the weight of it all, but there were also moments where I started to see things a little clearer. The anger, the hurt, and the confusion started to fade, replaced by something I hadn't expected: acceptance. I had always thought that cutting someone out of your life would leave a hole, an emptiness that couldn't be filled. But I was beginning to realize that the hole wasn't as deep as I had imagined. It wasn't that I no longer cared about the years we had shared, or that I suddenly forgot all the good times we had together. It was more like the realization that sometimes people come into your life for a reason, and when their purpose is done, it's okay to let them go. It didn't mean their impact on your life was meaningless. It just meant that it was time to move on. In the weeks following my decision to let Jake go, I began focusing more on myself. For the first time in a long while, I was prioritizing my own happiness. It wasn't that I had been unhappy before, but for years, I had been wrapped up in a relationship that had consumed so much of my energy. Jake's constant need for attention, his demands, and his manipulation had drained me in ways I hadn't fully realized until it was too late. Now, with the space and distance between us, I could breathe again. I spent more time doing the things that made me happy, things I had neglected for far too long. I picked up my guitar again, feeling the familiar comfort of the instrument under my fingers. Music had always been my escape, my refuge, and I had allowed it to slip away while I focused on trying to fix a friendship that wasn't meant to be fixed. I started writing again, pouring my thoughts and feelings into lyrics, trying to make sense of everything I had been through. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finding myself again. It wasn't just the music. I also reconnected with people I had lost touch with, old friends from college, coworkers I hadn't spoken to in months, people who had been a part of my life before Jake had taken up so much space in it. It felt good to laugh again, to share experiences and moments without the weight of betrayal hanging over my head. I realized how much I had neglected those relationships, how much I had allowed one toxic friendship to overshadow the rest of my life. It wasn't easy to rebuild those connections, but it was worth it. Slowly, I was learning that my worth wasn't tied to one person's actions, and that I didn't need anyone to validate my value. Despite all this, there were still moments when Jake's absence hit me harder than I cared to admit. There were times when I would think about something funny that had happened during one of our late-night talks, or I'd see something that reminded me of one of our shared memories, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like he was still there. And then reality would set back in, and I would remind myself that he had chosen to walk away from the friendship, that he had burned the bridge, not me. The hardest part was letting go of the idea of what our friendship could have been. I had invested so much of myself into Jake, believing that we would always be there for each other, that we would grow old together, still sharing stories and supporting one another through life. But that future was gone now. It wasn't just about forgiving him. It was about forgiving myself for allowing that relationship to go on for as long as it did. I had ignored the signs. I had turned a blind eye to the things that didn't sit right with me, and I had let his behavior slide because I didn't want to believe that my best friend could betray me. One afternoon, I found myself sitting in my apartment, flipping through an old photo album I had pulled off the shelf. It was filled with pictures from our high school years, trips we had taken, parties we had attended. There were dozens of photos of Jake and me, laughing together, celebrating life. As I looked through the pictures, I realized something. Those memories weren't any less real just because our friendship had ended. I could still appreciate the good times without pretending that everything between us was perfect. I could accept that we had shared something meaningful, even if that wasn't enough to make it last. It was a painful realization, but it was also freeing. I didn't have to hold on to the idea of a perfect friendship anymore. The past was the past, and it didn't have to define me. The person I had been with Jake, the person who had been blindly loyal and trusting, wasn't who I was anymore. I had learned painfully that loyalty doesn't mean letting someone take advantage of you. Trust doesn't mean ignoring red flags. And friendship doesn't mean sacrificing your own happiness for someone else's comfort. By the time summer rolled around, I felt like a different person. I wasn't completely healed. Healing, I had come to understand, was a process that took time, but I was getting there. I had started taking better care of myself, both physically and mentally. I had made new friends, rekindled old relationships, and rediscovered my passions. Most importantly, I had learned how to set boundaries, how to walk away from people who no longer served my well-being, no matter how hard it was. Then, one evening, as I was finishing up a long day at the store, I ran into someone who had been a part of Jake's circle for years but had never been close to me. Sarah, a girl who had always been friendly but never really someone I had spent much time with, approached me at the counter. She seemed hesitant at first, like she wasn't sure how to start the conversation. But when she finally spoke, her words caught me off guard. "Hey, I know this is going to sound weird," she began, "but I just wanted to check in on you. I've been hearing some things about Jake, and I know you two aren't talking anymore. I wanted to make sure you're okay." I was taken aback. I hadn't heard Jake's name in weeks, and here was someone bringing him up out of nowhere. "I'm doing fine," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Really, I'm moving on." Sarah nodded, her expression softening. "I just wanted to say that I'm sorry for what happened between you two. I know Jake messed up, and I don't know why he's been acting like this, but I know he's been struggling. He talks about you sometimes, you know. I think he feels guilty about how things ended." I hadn't expected to hear this from anyone. It wasn't a full apology from Jake, but it was the first time someone else had acknowledged the damage he had done. It didn't make things better, but it was a small piece of closure I didn't realize I needed. "Thanks," I said, managing a small smile. "It's good to know someone's thinking about it." We talked for a while longer, but as the conversation ended, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. I had finally let go. It wasn't about Jake anymore. It was about me, about moving forward and not allowing the past to control my future. I didn't need his apology to feel whole again. I had already healed in my own way, and I was ready for whatever came next. It had been several months since I had last heard from Jake, and the space between us felt permanent now. The anger and betrayal had faded into a dull ache, something I could live with but wouldn't forget. I had learned to move forward, and while the scars of our friendship would never fully disappear, they had become a part of my story, an important part but not the only part. I had discovered that healing wasn't a linear path. It wasn't about forgetting or erasing the past. It was about accepting it, learning from it, and growing stronger because of it. I spent more time with my new friends, people who hadn't seen me as a source of something to exploit, but as a person with value. I'd learned the hard way that true friendships aren't built on one-sided sacrifices, and those who truly care will never ask you to sacrifice your well-being. And through these new connections, I started rediscovering the parts of myself that had been buried under years of loyalty to someone who didn't deserve it. It felt like I was becoming whole again, like the pieces of myself that had been scattered were finally coming together. One late afternoon, when I was finishing up a shift at the music store, I received a text message. It wasn't from anyone I expected, but when I saw the name on the screen, I felt a jolt of surprise. It was from Jake. I hadn't thought about him much over the past few months. Sure, he crossed my mind occasionally, when I saw a picture of us, or when I caught myself remembering an old inside joke, but I had long since stopped expecting any kind of closure from him. I had moved on, but the message was there, and a part of me couldn't ignore it. Hey, I know this is random, but I've been thinking about everything. I know I screwed up. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to apologize, for real. I messed up with you and I've had a lot of time to think about it. I never meant to hurt you. I'm just sorry. The message was brief, but the sincerity behind it was impossible to ignore. Jake wasn't asking for reconciliation. He wasn't trying to justify what had happened or make excuses. He was simply apologizing. And in that moment I realized something. I didn't need this apology. Not anymore. For the first time since everything had gone down, I understood that I wasn't waiting for his apology to feel complete. I had spent so long searching for answers from him, hoping for some kind of validation or acknowledgement of the pain he caused, but what I didn't realize was that I didn't need him to fix anything. I had already done that myself. I had already healed, even if I didn't have all the pieces yet. I didn't need him to be a part of my closure anymore. I sat there for a few moments, staring at the screen, wondering what to say. Part of me wanted to respond with something sharp, to tell him that his apology was too little, too late. But I stopped myself. There was no point in dragging this out any longer. I had let go of the anger, and I wasn't going to let it resurface now. Thanks for the apology, Jake, I typed back, but I'm good. I've moved on, and I think it's better if we just leave it at that. I hesitated before hitting send, but when I finally did, I felt a strange sense of peace. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't resentful. I had given Jake what I needed to give him, my forgiveness, not because he asked for it, but because I had to give it to myself. I had to let go of the weight of his actions so I could move forward without looking back. The next few weeks went by in a blur. Life moved on as it always does. I continued to focus on the things that mattered, my work, my music, the relationships I was building with people who truly valued me. I had found a rhythm, and it felt like I was finally living for myself again. There was no more carrying the burden of someone else's choices. I had broken free. One day, as I was browsing through a stack of records at the store, I caught a glimpse of a familiar face. It was Mike, the guy who had been the first to acknowledge that something had been off with Jake. He was holding a vinyl album in his hands and looking at it with interest. When he saw me, he waved. "Hey man, how's everything going?" he asked, a genuine smile on his face. I smiled back. "It's going great, really good actually. I'm feeling better than I have in a long time." Mike nodded. "I'm glad to hear that. I know things between you and Jake got pretty crazy, but I'm proud of you for handling it the way you did. It's not easy to walk away from someone you've known that long." "Yeah, it wasn't easy, but it was the right thing to do," I replied. "I'm finally learning that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is let go of things or people that are holding you back." He gave me a knowing look. "Sounds like you've really figured things out. I'm happy for you." We talked for a few more minutes, and I realized something in that conversation. I had really come a long way. I had faced the pain, accepted the loss, and finally come to terms with the fact that not every relationship is meant to last forever. Some people come into your life for a season, and when that season is over, it's okay to let them go. It doesn't mean you forget the good moments you shared, but you don't have to keep holding on to something that's no longer serving you. Jake had been a part of my life for so long, but in the end, our paths had to separate. I had learned more from that friendship than I ever realized at the time. It had taught me to value myself, to recognize my worth, and to understand that loyalty doesn't mean allowing someone to take advantage of you. It meant having enough self-respect to walk away when it was time. And that's exactly what I did. I walked away. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I had grown stronger through the pain, and I had emerged from it more capable of taking care of myself and trusting my instincts. I no longer needed Jake to define who I was. I had learned to stand on my own 2 feet, and for the first time in a long while, I was at peace. The final goodbye wasn't dramatic or painful. It was quiet, peaceful, and filled with a sense of closure I hadn't known I needed. I had let go of the past, and I was ready for whatever the future held. My journey with Jake had come to an end, and though it had been hard, I knew it had been the right choice. And so I moved forward, into a future that was mine to create.